Hi 7-6, I hope you're all well. This is your fourth week's lesson on the project of dystopian fiction. Today we're going to be looking at creating your own dystopian setting, and eventually we are going to be writing our own short dystopian novel. So this is going to underpin that piece of writing that we'll do. What I'd like you to do to begin with for the first 5 minutes is answer these 3 questions, and if you fancy, have a go at the challenge. So your first question is a recap to write down 4 settings typically found in dystopian stories. So we've mentioned the different settings in the previous lessons that we've done, various different settings. So just make a note of those, look back at your notes, have a little brainstorm. The second question is to list 5 adjectives that you could use to describe a dystopian world. And the third is to list 5 language techniques that writers use to create a vivid setting. I'm not going to tell you what language techniques are, you should have an idea. So just list them down. So I would put 1, 2, 3 on your piece of paper, in your exercise book, or on your Word document, depending how you're doing this, and answer those 3 questions. And then if you really want to push yourself, have a go at the challenge in the yellow. So what's the name of the technique used by writers who use the weather to reflect a character's emotions? Give yourself 5 minutes, pause the video, have a go at those 3, possibly 4 questions, and then come back. Okay, so hopefully you come up with some ideas for those 3 or 4 questions. So first of all, write down 4 settings typically found in dystopian stories. So we would probably have an urban environment that might be quite polluted, that's falling apart. We would likely have a powerful dictator that was all controlling, segregation between the classes. Socially, people are very different. You might have a natural world that is either taking over an urban environment, so taking back what was once a flourishing city. It might be that the city itself is falling apart and the environment around it is growing and taking that over. It could be that the natural environment is actually falling apart itself as well. So maybe due to pollution and the influence of humans, the natural world is no longer functioning very well. We've got lots of wildfires, sea levels are rising, the temperature of the globe is going up. So they may well be some of the settings that you've mentioned. You've probably mentioned others as well, which is fine. So 5 adjectives, 5 describing words to describe your dystopian world. They could be an awful lot, so I'm not going to list any of those. And then 5 language techniques that writers use to create a vivid setting. So we might have something like a metaphor. You could have gone for a simile. You might have gone for onomatopoeia. You might have gone for powerful vocabulary. You might have gone for a list or repetition. There are lots you could have chosen there. And then finally, if you went for the challenge, what was the name of the technique used by writers who use the weather to reflect a character's emotions? And hopefully for those of you that looked at that, it was pathetic fallacy. So that's what the writers, that's the name of the technique that writers use to reflect the weather. So to affect somebody's emotions. So if somebody's feeling particularly sad and gloomy, you might expect the weather to be raining and miserable and grey. Not too dissimilar to right now, actually, as I look out of my window. But if they're having a lovely time and they're happy, it might be sunny, bright blue sky, fresh. If there's a kind of a pending sense of doom or tension or anger, you might have a storm. Darkness, fog maybe, lightning, thunder. Yeah, so that's how the weather might reflect somebody's mood, and we call that pathetic fallacy. So if you didn't have a go at the challenge, can you write pathetic fallacy? So P-A-T-H-E-T-I-C, pathetic, and then fallacy, F-A-L-L-A-C-Y, and then put the description that a writer uses this technique when they want the weather to reflect a character's emotions. It's a really nice one to use especially when we're trying to write our own setting for such a sort of fiction. So, as we said, we're going to be looking at creating our own setting, and eventually, as I've said also, you're going to write your own piece of fiction. So this is going to form the basis of your story. Now, in the blue box to the right, we've just got a reminder that setting of a text will include the location and time when events take place. Settings can play a crucial part in establishing an atmosphere and reflect the themes and characters. And dystopian novels are often set in places that are inhabitable. They've been destroyed or are preparing for destruction. So all of these things will come into play when we look at creating our own setting. The first task that I'd like you to do is to read the following extract from The Hunger Games. So you'll see that in a second. And then highlight or underline the language techniques that are used by the author to describe the setting. Now, I will attach this extract to Go for Schools and on Teams as a Word document. So if you have access to a printer, you can print it out, or if you're using Word, you could just get it up on the screen and use the highlight function to highlight or underline the language techniques. So as a quick reminder, on the right, we've got some of those techniques that you could look for. So metaphors, similes, powerful adjectives and verbs, any alliteration, onomatopoeia, personification and pathetic fallacy. So just as a reminder, so a metaphor is when you are comparing something to something. So you would say, instead of saying, for instance, my dog is like a teddy bear. So because you've used like, that would be a simile. If you wanted to make that phrase a metaphor, you would say my dog is a teddy bear. So you're saying that the thing you're describing is that. Not that it's like that or that it's as that, it is that. So my dog is a bear would be your metaphor. My dog is like a teddy bear would be a simile. Powerful adjectives and verbs, so powerful, descriptive, and doing words that really add a sense of emotion or a real descriptive what's the word that I'm looking for? Powerful, I guess. Image, a powerful image in your head of what the writer's trying to say. Alliteration, so where you have words next to each other with the same letter or sound at the beginning. Onomatopoeia is where you will have a word that sounds like the sound it's making. So it might be crash, slap, buzz, bang, something like that. Personification, so that's where you're giving an object, place or thing, characteristics of a human being. So it might be that the tree waved. So that's an object, a thing. Trees can't actually wave, they don't have hands. But as they move in the wind, the branches may look like arms waving. So you're giving that tree personal qualities. And then pathetic fallacy, as we've just said, is where the writer is creating the weather to reflect the mood of a character or characters. Okay. So let's have a look at this Hunger Games extract. Now remember, I want you to mostly focus on the setting. So we're looking for any of these language techniques that focus on the setting. So you can either read along yourself or I'll read too, whichever is best for you. Our house is almost at the edge of the scene. I only have to pass a few gates to reach the scruffy field called the meadow. Separating the meadow from the woods, in fact enclosing all of District 12, is a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire loops. In theory, it's supposed to be electrified 24 hours a day as a deterrent to the predators that live in the woods. Packs of wild dogs, lone cougars, bears that used to threaten our streets. But since we're lucky to get 2 or 3 hours of electricity in the evenings, it's usually safe to touch. Even so, I always take a moment to listen carefully for the hum that means the fence is live. Right now, it's silent as a stone, concealed by a clump of bushes, I flatten out on my belly and slide under a metre-long stretch that's been loose for years. There are several other weak spots in the fence, but this one is so close to home I almost always enter the woods here. As soon as I'm in the trees, I retrieve a bow and sheath of arrows from a hollow log. Electrified or not, the fence has been successful at keeping the flesh-eaters out of district. Inside the woods they roam freely, and there are added concerns like venomous snakes, rabid animals, and no real paths to follow. But there's also food if you know how to find it. My father knew, and he taught me some ways before he was blown to bits in a mine explosion. There was nothing left of him to bury. I was 11 then. 5 years later, I still wake up screaming for him to return. In the woods waits the only person with whom I can be myself. Gale. I can feel the muscles in my face relaxing, my pace quickening as I climb the hills to our place. A rock ledge overlooking a valley. A thicket of berry bushes protect it from unwanted eyes. The sight of him waiting there brings on a smile. Gale says I never smile except in the woods. So I would now pause this for 5 or 10 minutes, highlight, find some words, language techniques, come into that category there on the right, and then restart, and we will see if we share some of the same ideas. Okay, so what did we come up with? So in the green I've highlighted some powerful adjectives. In the pink I've highlighted some powerful verbs. Yellow we've got a simile. Blue we've got some onomatopoeia. In grey I have got what I think is a metaphor, a flesh eater. Now the reason I chose that as a metaphor is because these animals, they don't only eat flesh. They will eat the whole of the being that they consume, but flesh eaters is basically a way of saying they will eat every bit of you, and they're particularly nasty. So that's why I've gone for that as a metaphor. So we have the animals in this environment being described as predators. So they're hunting you down. They're a threat. The dogs are described as wild. They're uncontrollable. They're not tame. We associate dogs with being domesticated animals. Well, these ones aren't. The fence is alive. You could also say that's personified, but we know that if it's an electric fence and it's live, in this instance, it means that it has electricity running through it. A scruffy field, it sounds unkept. It sounds like maybe there's nothing particularly being grown in it by a farmer for agricultural purposes. It's just left to just be as it is. So as silent as a stone, we've got that simile. That sounds like a particularly cold image. A stone is a cold, hard object, which maybe is a reflection of the environment that they're living in, that it's a very cold and hard place to live. The hum of the fence, I think when you hear the word hum, you can all imagine that noise if you've ever been out on a walk and you walk past a field, maybe with cattle or something in, or horses, and there's that really faint buzz that you can hear in the air. I always remember when I was a child, we had these fields behind where I lived, and I don't know why, but they were called the fiery fields, which makes them sound quite menacing, and they really weren't. They were just full of cattle and farms, and it was a really lovely place to go off and explore. There was rope swings and streams and all sorts of things, although the cows did chase you, so it was a bit scary. But anyway, I digress. The reason that image comes to mind when I think of a hum is there used to be lots of pylons that would run across these fields, and as you walked across them you could really hear the hum, and sometimes it would almost feel like you could feel the static in the air, which is a really strange idea, but you can almost feel this buzz, particularly in your hair. And And I used to always be scared that we'd get electrocuted, or, you know, you have all these wild thoughts when you're little. But yeah, so the fiery fields for me, they come to mind when I think of the hum of electricity. But I'd hope lots of us could come up with an image where we've seen a fence that has that same sort of sound, or maybe you too have walked under pylons and you've heard it as well. Anyway, we've discussed the flesh-eater metaphor, and then I also went for screaming. So although that's describing a memory that the character has of their father, it's still the world that they're living in, that they wake up screaming. That's part of the setting that they're in. This is a recurring thing. So I think that's a really important verb to highlight, because they're obviously not sleeping well. They obviously have these really traumatic memories that all contribute to the setting and the world around them. So hopefully you came up with lots of others. So some examples of dystopian settings. So in George Orwell's 1984, the world is under complete government control, and a dictator, Big Brother, enforces omnipresent surveillance over the people living in there. And the 3 intercontinental superstates remaining after a world war. So that's one setting that you might be aware of. The other one, in the novel The Road by Cormac McCarthy, that's post-apocalyptic, and it's about a father and a son who are venturing across the ruins of America after an extinction event. So there's not many people left. So you can imagine the world that they're in is pretty dystopian. So can you think of any other examples of settings used in this in other famous dystopian novels or films? So if you could take 5 minutes to have a think, maybe 10 minutes, again make some notes and then come back to the video. So as I said, we're going to develop our own dystopian setting, and we need to consider the following points. So in your setting, who now has the power and why do they have it? Who is the most vulnerable in your dystopian setting and why? What still works and functions and what no longer exists? And what do people remember and what have they forgotten? Either names, cultural practices and people and places. So your third task is going to be to plan your setting. So I want you to draw a mind map similar to this that says dystopian setting in the middle with 3 arrows. Make sure you leave lots of space around your middle of the map to write the answers to these 3 headings. So what makes it dystopian? Now you'll see there's a little globe there in blue, and if we go back, there's a globe there. So that basically means for that topic, that headline, I want you to address all of these 4 points here. So for what makes it dystopian, you need to have an answer for all of these, and you'll put those notes under that heading. Where is it set? That's where you'll come up with your different settings. As much information as you can there. And then when is it set? So what time in history is it? Is it the present day or is it in the future? Remember, you're not writing your story or your setting here, you're just planning it. So take a good 20 minutes, half an hour. Have a go at making up your plan. I'm going to now finish this bit of the video and there'll be a part 2 again. Yeah, so when you have done that, restart the video on part 2, which is a separate video.